Hello and welcome to the Business of Data podcast. My name is Catherine King and I'll be your host. In this podcast, we chat to senior executives from a range of departments, industries and functions, all about their passions, experiences and challenges within data analytics. Let's go ahead and dive straight into today's episode. Welcome to the Business of Data podcast. Amazing. This week we are going to be covering the reality of data in practice. And to do just that, I'm joined on stage by the wonderful Sean MacCarthy, who's the VP of Analytics for Good Sam and Camping World. Now, many of you here in the room today have had the pleasure of getting to know Sean, but for our listeners at home, if you haven't had the pleasure, Sean has been with Good Sam and Camping World since April 2022, so very, very new to the role. Prior to that, has worked within well-known brands including Claire's, Walgreens and Sears as well. And Sean is one of our incumbent members of the Global Business of Data Advisory Board as well. Hi Sean, how's it going?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, try that again.
Hey, Catherine. Oh, there we go. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
It's been a wonderful couple of days here in Chicago.
Absolutely.
Obviously, you're from here, right?
I am.
So it's been great to spend a bit of time. Now, on the podcast, I always start with a bit of a fun fact or going into it. Now, I had one planned, but I'm really distracted by your socks, so I've got to ask about them because our listeners aren't going to see this. Talk me through the sock choice.
So these are my Paigey socks. My fourth kid is named Paige, and she loves when Dad wears Paigey socks. And so I figured if I'm going out and going to be a part of a show today, that I'm going to make my daughter proud.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Now, the pre-planned preamble to the podcast that I had, because I absolutely love this about you, Sean, is that your background is quite interesting when it comes to data leaders in the fact that you have a PhD. It's actually in philosophy, right?
That's right.
Talk me through that.
I tried computer engineering and enjoyed surfing and not going to classes more. So they kicked me out, and I said, all right, liberal arts it is. And I always loved the big questions, and so I had the fortune of answering those first in my life as opposed to waiting till I was retired. And I had a wife who supported me through that and all the money I don't make in grad school. And then we started having kids. She said, get a job. And I said, all right, let's do this, and was fortunate to find a gentleman who was willing to hire people who I was able to fool him into thinking was smart. And everything from then was all about the data, all about how that data could be used to drive improvement and drive change. And thankfully, with a background in philosophy and a lot of formal logic training, and again, coding background in high school, but nothing serious. But with formal logic training, I mean, the world's greatest Swiss Army knife of Excel, SQL, Python R, a lot of those, it's just a bunch of nested ifs. It's really all coding is. And so having that background made it easy to transition. And, I'd spend 30 pages researching a big question on life, knowing that in philosophy you spend a lifetime on one potential big question and you never get the right answer, right? Because look at all the brilliant philosophers and all of them disagree. Take that mentality of though digging and digging and digging, apply it to the business world, and what do you have? Data scientists, data analytics, right? Give us the data, let us figure out the old Sesame Street axiom. One of these things is not like the other. One of these things just doesn't belong. There's your outlier. There's your solution. Go get it.
I just love that because I am on a bit of a mission through different projects that we're doing at Business of Data of trying to prove that there isn't one route into data. And I think from a lay perspective and a business perspective, there can sometimes be this almost misunderstanding that you've got to have that kind of hardcore technical skills, like right from the moment you left high school. And it's a case that actually you can have people that have this business background or academic background, and there's so many different directions in, and it brings something very interesting to the team, I think. And I'm keen to dive into that a little bit deeper. How do you think it has impacted you as a leader today in the fact that you've had this background in philosophy going forward?
When it comes to, I don't know if it's the philosophy itself or just more the academic background. I mean, data scientists, you find a lot of academics to be hired, but they're typically coming from disciplines where they're explicitly about the math. And I've been very fortunate in one sense that I've been challenged with very tiny budgets for data scientists. And so having to find them where, okay, you're not an explicit degree with analysis, statistics, econographics, whatever it is, econometrics, et cetera, but you were the math nerd with the biology PhD or master's who was actually doing all the number crunching for every research project done by your professor that was your mentor. So finding those types of people where it's like, hey, I was doing this, but I was also coding this and I was doing these things. And that's, when it comes to, I've just been more open to that because just like most of the greatest philosophers ever, they didn't have degrees in anything. And they were just really smart people who thought well and were able to express that. And when it comes to data analytics and data science, it's the same kind of thing. Just if you can look at a problem and start peeling it back and figuring it out, I want you on my team. And if you're hungry and learning, that's the other reason I do like hiring various academic type backgrounds, because there's just this hunger to learn. And so I know I can say, you don't know how to do this today. I'm going to give you the time on the project to figure out how to do it first. And then you come back and teach the rest of the team. And so those opportunities come up frequently.
I'll challenge it ever so slightly. Do you find with those with the academic background that there is a bit of almost teaching that needs to go into the realities of corporate as well? In the sense of you can have academics and they want to go down this really interesting route and the business goes, is it going to help move them? Like, what's the goal here and the value here? And we've spoken about that across the conference extensively about this data value. Like, is it going to make a difference to the business? And what is interesting and what makes a difference can sometimes be very different things. So do you find there is that element to it which can be quite hard for people of an academic nature? Yeah,
I was actually told by the first person to hire me in the corporate world that about 3 months in he was ready to fire me. Because I was too academic. Everything was a paper, everything was research, nothing could be a 30-second elevator pitch. And he's like, but you got over that hump, and it took a lot of coaching, too much. But it's the same kind of thing that when I work with those people coming in from those backgrounds, it's the same with undergrad, whether you're graduate degrees or, again, when you have tiny budgets, guess who you're hiring? You're not hiring experienced people, you're hiring people who are just hungry, out of school, ready to go, and it's teaching them in a corporate world what's going to help get them ingratiated with the people we support. Because let's be honest, we don't do anything for our business. We don't push buttons that make things show up. We don't make the materials. We help the rest of the business do their jobs better, right? And so if they don't like us, right, it's really hard to justify to continue to exist because you're almost always dependent on their budget to have employment. And so, yeah, it's been about let's drive to the value, let's drive to what's important, not the interesting but useless fact, but the thing that's going to drive change. Or, okay, mathematically this would be the ideal thing to do, our operational system, and get to know the business in a way that says, in John's example earlier this morning had it right, the 12 prices. Well, we can't handle 12 prices. We handle 4 pricing schemes. Okay, figure that out with your business. What can the systems, the processes, and the people handle, and tailor your algorithms to that, tailor your research to that.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to pull us back out ever so slightly. Now, obviously, you and I were very fortunate to catch up quite regularly with the advisory board activities that we do. And I'm just keen for our audience here today and for our listeners to just get a bit of an overview from you. And as I mentioned in the intro here, you've worked across a few different industries, different organizations of different sizes. What would you say is the data reality for most organizations?
It's a really mixed bag of okay to not great, or if it is great, it's great in a very limited way, and you're constantly working to help get it to where it could be and should be. And it's not because the companies have done anything wrong. It's that if a company's been successful and been around long enough and wasn't digitally born, their data's built in a way that wasn't meant for data scientists. It's structured in a way that wasn't meant for data scientists. And so how you evolve that and get that to move through, you have to work, whether you get to own the data engineering team, whether it's cross-functional, working with them, it's helping everyone understand, if you want me to solve these problems, we need this data. We have pieces of it, we have all of it, we have all of it but low quality, we need to do these things to enrich it, helping people understand what it takes to do the real magic that is data science and not the magic of make something out of nothing. That I think is what I've seen, and I don't know every conference I typically go to, I typically hear, yep, that's our world, right? Because again, if you're not more than a few years old, or you're Amazon and have been around for 20 years, but were born digitally, your data's just not in a perfect place, and it never will be.
Yeah, 100%. So I'm in a weird space in LinkedIn where I get a lot of weird, nerdy memes about data. And I saw one the other day and it made me laugh because it was basically someone was asking the data team, like, hey, can you just pull this data set for me? And the whole joke was, yes, let me just go to that perfect data source that, exists that you think does, because it's not the reality, right? So from your experience, how much in terms of percentage is that ready to be consumed by data scientists in terms of that data, ready to go in a sense of when the business comes to you and says, hey, do this thing, what's the reality behind that?
Yeah, 5 to 20%, depending on the problem being asked. And some of it's, no, you might have the data perfectly. You don't need me to help you answer this question. A basic linear regression in Excel will get the job done, and you have all the POS data you need to do it. So just like, you're throwing a lot of horsepower at something that just doesn't need it. And so, but when you do need the horsepower, oftentimes it is, no, you're going to go curate that set yourself. You're going to spend a lot of the time, which I think data scientists have gotten used to, at least for the sake of proof of concepting or some kind of MVP or research purpose, because that's what they were doing in academia, right? Same type of thing, but it's when you want to go to the production level that you've got to make sure every other duck is in a row to make that possible. Otherwise, your algorithm was great for the one-time purpose, and it just dies there.
And I know, again, here at this conference and so many content creation opportunities, we talk about the difference between kind of those sandbox moments into production and then what happens to those models when they're in production, keeping an eye on them for all the other various things as well. But just to come back to that kind of 5 to 20% that you gave there, what are you seeing companies do to close that gap? Is it a case that they're focusing on a little bit of kind of a use case example of data and they're cleaning that up and they're getting it to a high quality, high governance, understanding it? Or is it a case that you just look at it and say, we've got to make some big changes overall, or is it a bit of both?
It's probably a bit of both, especially depending on your industry, right? Certain industries are heavily regulated, so they've had to do a lot of that very quickly in order to make sure they're keeping in line with all of the latest compliance rules, right? Everyone's going to start having to do that, especially when it comes to customer data, regardless of whether you're a finance, insurance, or health organization, because the different laws between Colorado, Virginia, California, and if you deal internationally, obviously Canada's laws, Europe's laws, those are coming for everybody, right? And in the one sense, it's like our regulation, but on the other hand, it's like, oh, we're going to have to get our data cleansed and actually have lineage and definitions and all the things that data scientists love to have in their data sets. Oh, okay, maybe we should take advantage of this to actually drive and build it the way we ought to build it, this, from the start, as opposed to just incremental, okay, well, here comes another regulatory rule. Let's, right, try and architect it from the beginning, because you're going to have to, no matter what, spend the money in the next year or two if you're doing anything with customer data.
Now, you spoke earlier about legacy And I think it's a really interesting concept that I think many accept it, many deny it. It's a case for many in the room. If, as you mentioned, if you're not digitally native, you're going to be dealing with some level of legacy as well. Now, you mentioned in a previous discussion about the fact that you may not be asking the same questions now as you were 15, 20 years ago or even further. And the way you've structured that data is going to be different as well. How do we solve this?
I think this is where investment in flexible architectures from a technology standpoint, which doesn't necessarily mean money, it can be open source, and a true investment in data engineering, right? It's not the old world of, oh, I need a couple SQL DBAs and a good appliance and the rest will take care of itself for some basic data dumps. It's, I need to have data engineers who understand what it will be like when the data scientist does finish the research to say, okay, now we got to productionize it so that the frequency, the cleanliness, the error reporting and any kind of data imputation that may be needed are built into the actual ELT or ETL processes themselves. And so I think companies have to be ready to invest on the data side in a way that's not the traditional, let me just migrate to the cloud. Okay, well, you just took all your SQL and just put it in the cloud. Fine. Don't get me wrong, from a compute perspective, the elasticity there is great. From a well, now go do all the magic data science. It's not automatic. No, I still need to structure all the things relative to the questions that are being asked. Or, again, if you have enough forward-thinking strategy in your company, the types of questions we think we're going to be asking, how can we start capturing now or building the structures now to make it possible so that when we do need to solve that problem finally, the data's there and the team can just go to working.
So for me, I think that really lends into the bigger conversations that we have so regularly around the data culture, right? It's where your organization is on that scale as to whether you're going to be thinking about the questions you're going to be asking in the future and how you can enable that. What's your advice when it comes to executives of buying them into this culture and keeping that front of mind? Because again, some organizations, they're blessed with a C-suite who are data-minded, data-driven, no matter if they're 100 years old or 2 years old. And then you have some organizations where it's just such a struggle. What's your advice?
Even with the executives who, I don't know any executive that would, well, they wouldn't admit I'm not data-driven or data-focused, or no, of course they all are. Do they understand what it takes, and have you done a good job of educating them what it takes? Kind of like, what does it take to execute a really good retail experience? Just, again, I have a lot of retail background, right? But to go to a store and enjoy the experience as a customer, from the how the store is organized, the way the employee, right? There's so much thought that goes in a retail organization to that customer journey, right? And they understand, because that's what retail's been forever. How much thought of that is going into how we treat and enable our data? Are we willing to truly make the investment necessary? And don't get me wrong, that can mean a lot of money. It can also mean a little money and just, no, we need to take the processes we have and the tech we've already paid for and actually utilize it to its maximum. Or, especially when it comes to data quality, we need to work with the operators in the business who are generating all the data, whether it's a frontline associate or whether it's a buyer or a merchandiser or an inventory group or an accounting group, and making sure we understand how their processes work and why. Well, why is that a negative number in that field instead of a positive number? And the minutiae. And if it needs to be different, how do we help enable them to make it different? And the C-suite needs to understand that, how hard good data is, and it's not easy. And where I've actually found it toughest is when you're dealing with a C-suite where they've come from a company that was successful and has that, and they are now at a company that doesn't. And they're just like, well, this is easy, my old company. And it's like, but you didn't build that. You had no clue what it took to build. You had these CIOs who did an amazing job, or you had these CDOs who did an amazing job, and you just got to be a beneficiary. You showed up and you were in a Lamborghini with Mario Andretti, and boom, right? You're off to the races. Good for you. But you can't, again, don't say it like that, right? we nerds can talk like that amongst ourselves, but don't talk to other C-suite that way. Just help them understand, here's why it's hard, here's why it's difficult, and here's why we've got to make the right investment, because we want to do all the cool things for you. We want to give you what Amazon does when they wake up in the morning, and heck, while they were sleeping, because they automated it. We want to do that for you. But this is what it's going to take to do that. Understand that difficulty.
Yeah. Now, the other day when we were in a networking session, you said something really interesting. I want to unpick that here whilst I've got you, which is you don't believe that buzzwords are overly helpful to data teams. And that's a really interesting concept to me, because I know leaders on both sides of the story. Some love a buzzword and will use it to go to their executives and be like, here's the sexiest thing that we're going to achieve for you, but I need to first do this. Here you go. Thank you very much. And there's others, I'm assuming you're in that camp, where it's like buzzwords, they're just not helpful. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, it goes both ways, right? Because we can get really excited about certain technology and all the buzzwords that go with it, and so we want to go back and pitch it as if everyone knows what we're talking about, and really we're just speaking Klingon. But that's just a translation issue, and learn how to speak business. What's harder is when you get executives who go to conferences or talk to these vendors, and these vendors, no offense to you guys in the room who are here, you do have amazing products and amazing technology, and you showed off the capability to our C-suite, not knowing any understanding of how our underlying data structures may be. And so yes, at your 5 white paper use cases, you knocked it out of the friggin' park, and it was amazing. And then our CEO is like, well, I saw them knock it out of the park. Here, let's go do it here. And, oh, why aren't you guys knocking it out of the park? I know the vendor can do it, so it's a you problem. No, it's not. That's why whatever the hype, the latest hype is, right? Whatever the underlying tech is, at the end of the day, it comes down to, do you have the people and processes to really support what you ultimately are trying to solve from a business perspective, right? And if the answer is no, show them the map to get there, right? Don't just say no. Give them the map. This is what we would need to be able to do it. Yeah. Here's what we can do now. Here's what we can do in 6 months if we get this, et cetera.
And I think that is such an interesting cultural point as well, in a sense of how many conversations are you having with the C-suite that they've gone off and done that, and you've had to have that conversation. You should be kind of keeping in touch along the way, so that it's not kind of this jarring moment where you go, yeah, I'm sorry, we can't do that, and you've got to then suddenly, build that, right? Because they should be brought along with that journey, and you should be that close with the business. Now you've gone from sparkly tiaras to camper vans.
Yep.
It's quite a transition.
Yes.
What's that meant in terms of data in reality for you? Is it similar? Is it different? Talk me through that.
From a general data as data, it's the same, right? Mixed data quality, really good quality here, not great here, but the world of tiaras and unicorns and all the wonderful things that Claire's offers, that's our product, it's our design. We know where she's going to get it from and how she's going to use it all the time. Because, it's a very minute camping, RV life. It's auto, it's service, it's retail, it's all the things that go around a lifestyle on the road of insurance, financing, roadside assistance, all those types of things. And so it's fascinating cross-section of how someone lives who has one of these things, right? It really is a community unto itself. And so it's been really cool to see, because that's part of why I love data science and analytics in general, is trying to figure out the consumer is one heck of a thing, right? I have 3 daughters, so when it's the fickle 3 to 11-year-old daughter I have, right? That was Claire's. Now it's the adventurous, I want to go out and see the world by the road crowd. And now with peer-to-peer everything, I want to fly in and then see the world in a camper, right, as well. Just the intersection of all those touch points a customer's life, because it's their travel. With COVID, it became how a lot of people are choosing to live. The small house movement, things like, it's just a lot of fun to see, like, how are people interacting with us now? The demographic shift is dramatic as well, from primarily retirees to, I mean, still primarily, but the shift towards the 20 to 40-year-old demographic, especially post-COVID, has been huge.
Yeah.
So it's really exciting to just be in that space and, hey, we're charting a new path. How do we figure it out fast so we continue to offer such a great service to them?
Absolutely. Now, I always end every single podcast with this same question. What is the one thing you would love our listeners at home and our audience here today to just bring with them, to be meditating on, to be thinking about for the rest of their day?
Man, that's...
Oh, it's the hard one last.
I think be open to talent that's... And this is something I loved when I did work at Claire's and had an international team, is that in Europe, you guys aren't as sticky on it has to be degree driven. The idea that there can be great talent found with YouTube and a drive. I can get a data scientist out of anybody. I could take a 16-year-old, right? And as long as they're willing to put the effort to learn and they have that hunger to code and solve problems, you can get some amazing talent that doesn't have a PhD, that doesn't have a master's. Don't get me wrong, those people are wonderful too. But be more open to that, I think, as a society in North America especially. We need to get more open to hiring people who don't necessarily always have the degree. Because with Kaggle and GitHub and all the different ways people can show off what they do with code, you just want someone who's really creative with it and has that penchant for the math. And then have those people that can mentor them on the more hardcore math. Yeah. But I think that, to me, there's so much opportunity to be mined there.
Amazing. Sean, thank you for joining me today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Are you wanting to meet with other senior executives in the data and analytics space? In an environment that is created for connection and inspiration? Then why not join one of our in-person conferences? We have events all over the world, and you can find out the ones closest to you by visiting coriniumintelligence.com/events.